According to the Harvard Youth Poll, 40% of 18 to 29-year-olds say they will definitely vote in the midterms. That is on track to possibly exceed the record-breaking youth turnout in the 2018 midterms. The poll also finds 73% of young Americans believe the rights of others are under attack, and 59% believe their own rights are. Back with us tonight to discuss the man who knows best, John Della Volpe, director of polling at the Harvard Kennedy School and author of Fight, How Gen Z is channeling their fear and passion to save America. John, you are the number one person I want to ask this. All these young people registering to vote. Do we even know, do they answer pollsters' calls? Because they don't answer our calls.
Right, it's tough to get a response back to text. But Stephanie, we've been at this now for 22 years. And every semester, we conduct a couple of thousand in-depth interviews with young people across the country in a very robust way. Most polls that we're seeing in the news and the aggregation sites might do a couple hundred at most. We're doing a couple thousand, 4,000 or 5,000 a year. And what we found, which is different than the better part of the last 40 years, when baby boomers, when Gen Xers, when millennials were eligible to vote in midterm elections, roughly 4 in 5 stayed home.
I believe that. Good year. I was not very responsible about voting when I was in college.
On a good year. And in 2014, 16 or 17% turned out. The difference is Donald Trump comes into office, Parkland students inspire a generation, Gen Z votes for the first time at record-setting levels. Twice as many participated than in the last 40 years. The same wave continued in 2020. The only way within polling to identify this kind of precise level of interest is these large, robust, academic-like surveys. And that's why we're pretty confident that we're going to see, listen, I'm not sure if we're going to see a red wave. I'm not sure we're going to see a blue wave. I'm confident we'll see a Gen Z wave next week.
A Gen Z wave, but will that wave skew Democrat, how it traditionally does? When you said they're motivated by Donald Trump winning in Parkland, to me, that's Democrat.
Yeah, and in 2018, for perspective, 7 out of 10 voted Democrat. So in 2018, 10 seats went from red to blue because of the increased turnout and the increased partisanship, which was relatively new in terms of that margin. We're tracking perhaps not 70%, but our polls showed that in the high 50s, 57% of young likely voters prefer Democrats. That's up 5 points since the spring. There's still some undecideds. The thing about young voters, which is different than a lot of the other subgroups, is you have young voters in Pennsylvania. We know where they are. We have young voters in Georgia. You have young voters everywhere. It's not the case with a lot of the other subgroups that we're focused on. So in many ways, this country is divided 50-50, yes, but it's really better to think about this country as being divided based upon your age. If you're under 45, 2/3 are voting Democrat.
What's driving them to the polls? Is it abortion? And if it is abortion, is that men and women or just women?
Well, you talked about, well, men and women are just as likely. If you're in a battleground state, you're more likely than everyone else to turn out to participate, by the way.
But what issue is pushing young voters?
I think this two things, right? One is for conservatives and for Republicans and men, clearly inflation, cost of living, the economy, just like everybody else. That's clear.
Young ones.
Young ones, okay? But there's the second, third, fourth, and fifth most important issues are Democratic-leaning issues. They include abortion. They include protecting our democracy, climate change, as well as gun violence prevention and gun control.
Biden's move to forgive student debt was meant to help get out that young vote. Is it working?
Well, it's hard to say one effort necessarily is driving this, but I think not all partisanship is negative. Right? There's positive partisanship as well. What I mean by that is young people vote when they see the tangible difference that their participation can make. Young voters voted in 2020 for 3 or 4 things, one of which was to relieve student debt, $10,000. And the president delivered that. So without question, that brings more faith in the system.
Okay, he delivered it,
yeah.
But are they saying like, yep, thanks, on to the next? Or are they saying, you delivered it, now I'm going to show up and vote? Like, did it have an impact that will push them to the polls?
this generation sees the distinct difference that their participation can make. It's different than other generations. So I think the combination, again, it's hard to disaggregate these things, but the combination of like the significant fear not just for themselves, but fear for other members of the community. We talked about this. You talked about this in the open. 7 out of 10 people feel like the rights of other Americans are under attack. That's clearly driving people as well. So it's not only themselves, but they're voting to protect other people more vulnerable.
But that goes back to my abortion question. Is it only women that are motivated by the overturning of Roe versus Wade, or are men too? Because last I checked, men are 100% responsible for unwanted pregnancies.
Listen, no disagreement here. Clearly, it's the data shows it's a more important driver for women. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. However, there's a 15-point gap in the difference between how many men think they're under attack versus others. So men see this. I'm not saying it's a significant driver that is for women, specifically college women on campuses.
We're out of time, but fair to say you're predicting a Gen Z voter turnout wave next week?
Yes, and we're beginning to see that already.
A Gen Z voter turnout wave, and many of those people are probably not accounted for in all the polls we hear about?
It's a very difficult subgroup to reach. I think they're not accounted for.
Not accounted for, and they're coming out in droves. You heard it here.